Hi everybody, and welcome back to your next instalment of the Hollyburn Sewalong, and this time it's all about cutting out your pattern pieces ready to sew. So what pieces you'll be cutting out today is going to depend on what version of the skirt you're making, and I am going to be cutting out version C. So I'm locating exactly which pattern pieces that I'm going to need to cut out, so I need to find parts 5, 6, 7 and 10. When you open up your skirt pattern, you'll find your tissue paper pattern pieces all folded up neatly inside. All you need to do is unfold them, carefully mind it's tissue paper, and just locate all of the patterns you'll need. So here's my pattern piece number 10 for the waistband. Once I've located all of the pattern pieces that I need, I start to cut them out. Now I never cut out individual sizes for these patterns. All I'm doing is cutting around each pattern piece and leaving all of the different multiple sizes intact. This is just personal preference because I like to have the option of being able to make this skirt in multiple sizes in the future if I want to. As with so many things I'm including in these tutorials, this is just my preferred way of getting things done. When it comes to doing things yourself, just find something that works for you. There are no rules here. So as you see, I'm just cutting around the outside of each pattern piece, and I'm using paper scissors for this, so no blunting of my fabric shears. To keep things tidy, all of the pieces that I'm no longer using, I fold back up and I'm going to put them away. It can be a little bit of a tight squeeze, but if possible, I always like to put those pattern pieces back into their original envelope, just because it stops any of them going astray, so that if I need them in the future, I'll know exactly where they are. Now we've got our pieces together, it's time for the fun part, cutting out fabric. And for my version C, I'm going to be using this lovely indigo denim. You're going to want a nice flat surface to cut out your fabric on. I use my kitchen table covered with a self-healing mat, but in a pinch I have been known just to use the floor. Rolly wants me to let you know that the presence of a pug is necessary at this part of the process, but I'm sure you'll get by without one. Before we get cutting, you may want to have a quick look at the cutting layout that's included with the pattern. This shows us two different widths of fabric, 44-45 inches or 59-60 inches, and this may be the kind of layout that you're going to want for your pieces as you cut them out. Now I'm not going to lie, the majority of the time I do ignore the cutting layout that's included with patterns, and that's because I like to do a lot of fabric management and use as little fabric as possible. You can see here that I haven't actually folded my fabric completely in half. I've just folded over one edge, and I do that because I'll only fold over as much as I need to cut out an individual pattern piece. So when I lay the pattern onto the folded fabric, you can see I have hardly any excess hanging over on the sides, which means that when I cut this out, there'll be very little wastage left over. So when we're placing our pattern piece ready to cut, it's very important that we keep this arrow, the grain line on the pattern piece, in line with the actual grain of the fabric. So we want the grain of the fabric to be running in exactly the same direction of that arrow. If you don't cut your fabric correctly on grain, your completed garment may warp when you wear it and basically become very misshapen and unattractive. I also cut my fabric on the fold with the right sides of the fabric together, which basically means that any marks that I put on the fabric at this point are all going to be hidden inside the garment rather than on the outside, as I like to use a rotary cutter and transfer paper when I am cutting out my pattern pieces. When using transfer paper, you're going to notice that the underside is waxy and comes usually in a pretty bright colour. I'm using yellow today as I think it's going to show up well on this denim fabric. And you'll want to have that waxy side down underneath your pattern piece as you're transferring the marks of the pattern onto your fabric. Sometimes you'll need to rearrange to get the best fit. Don't worry if you can't do everything in one go. You can always use multiple pieces of paper or even move your transfer paper around as you go. But I think we've got a pretty good layout here. So I am going to pin my pattern piece through the transfer paper onto my fashion fabric. Now that that's all pinned in place, we use our tracing tool to carefully trace along all of the lines of the pattern. This is going to leave a nice waxy imprint on our fashion fabric, and make sure that you don't forget to transfer all additional markings like notches and fold lines at this point as well. When that's done, you just need to take the pins out, lift up the transfer paper and take a look at your good work. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of what those transferred markings will look like on your fashion fabric. Roly finds this whole process thrilling, can't you tell? Now that our fabric's been all marked up, what we're going to do is start cutting. But first of all, I like to put some pins into the fabric because it's still on the fold and we want to make sure it doesn't shift too much during the cutting process. I love using a rotary cutter to cut fabric, and that's because the fabric doesn't move, as when you cut with scissors you have to lift up fabric. So this is what I'm going to be showing you today. All you have to do is, using the rotary cutter, cut along the lines that you traced, and it's as simple as that. We've pinned the fabric in place so it's not moving too much, and we get a nice, clean, defined cut without the fabric shifting and therefore the pattern piece distorting when we're cutting it. And if I could cut fabric this fast, that would be amazing. It's as simple as that. At this point, I also like to make tiny little snips where the notches are marked on my fabric pieces. You'll want to repeat this cutting out process until each one of your fabric pieces is cut out and ready to go. So there's just one more thing left to cut out, and that is interfacing. Now the version that I'm doing just requires interfacing on the waistband. If you're doing versions A or B with some of the waistband detailing, those smaller pieces may also need to be interfaced. And this is just how I like to cut out my interfacing with whatever project I'm sewing. I take the pattern piece that requires interfacing and I lay it wrong side down on the interfacing that I'm using. This is just woven iron-on interfacing. I then pin it in place and I cut directly around the pattern piece through to make an identical version on the interfacing. I can use my rotary cutter for this, but I felt like getting out my fancy Ginger scissors for this video, just to show you that it's perfectly possible to do this whole process just with fabric scissors. A perfectly matched piece of interfacing, all ready to be ironed on. And there you have it, guys. All our pieces are cut out, and the next step is the exciting one because we are now ready to sew! Thanks for watching. As always, please leave any queries or comments down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But join me again here soon when we're going to start sewing our Hollyburn skirt. Say bye, Roly!